How many of you have seen the movie Gran Torino? Gran Torino, okay? Well, whether you've seen it or not, you're going to hear about it. It was out some years ago, starring Clint Eastwood. He was playing the part of a man that was a Korean veteran. He had lost his wife. He was home now in his little house that he kept so nice. Each day he sat out on his porch accompanied by his little ice box with his beer in it. And he had his cigarettes and he had his dog. He drove a truck. Oh, what about Gran Torino? Gran Torino sat there and just glowed. He never took it out that much, but he had his truck. He also had some neighbors that moved in. They were from a completely different society than Walter was aware of. He had been in Korea, of course, so these people kind of resembled another type of peoples. They were called the Hmong. It's H-M-O-N-G. And he didn't like it when their kids ran across his lawn. He'd come out and yell at them, "Get back over there." You see, he didn't like those people, and he hadn't hardly met them, but he saw them coming and going. Finally, somewhere in the link, one of the younger girls there, young adult, came over to say hello to him. She seemed like she could work between the two cultures, and so she would talk to him a lot. Finally, she invited him to come over to their home. They were having a big luncheon, He tried to refuse, but eventually he went. And he found all these people talking different ways. The grandmother, the matriarch of the family, was sitting there just gazing at him. You know, like it said, "Who are you and I hate you?" And he just yelled at her back. And he kept roaming around trying to figure out what all this food was like. Finally, he noticed that the younger guys and gals, the teenagers, had gone down to a place in the basement where they could hang out and talk like they wanted to talk. Because the teenagers were now pretty much acquainted with the United States. So he went down there and he noticed this one boy who went off to the side. He also noticed the girl across from him couldn't take her eyes off of him. Walter was very upset about this when all the kids went upstairs. He said to the young boy who he held back, he said, "You're a stupid fool." You have to remember, Walter only knew one language. And it was pretty gross. "You stupid kid, what's wrong with you? You got any brains in your head, kid? You got a woman across or a girl gazing at you, and you're not willing to talk to anybody. What's wrong with you?" "Well, I don't know. During the film, he finds ways to help this kid. He finds him a job. He asks him to do certain work in the house with him. And pretty soon there was a pretty good conversation between the two of them. And then again, there was that young woman who came over periodically to see how he was doing because he liked talking with her. And so it happened that one time there was this gathering, but what had happened was that it had been a sad gathering because that young girl had been out on the street going somewhere when the gang made up of those foreigner people decided to abuse her to the point where she was just torn to pieces, bruised, bones broken, and he found out about that. Now, he had come unknowingly to love these people. He would never admit that. He probably wouldn't admit it to himself. But he began to be kind of a watchdog for these people to see if anybody was bothering them. Once or twice he had scared this gang by threatening them. He would just hold out his finger and look at them and go, "No gun, yet." And he found out about this woman. You know what he did? First, he got a haircut. Second, he bought a beautiful new suit. And then he made some arrangements. And it turned out that he was trying to find a way to get rid of this gang, but he couldn't really shoot them because he would go to jail. He wanted them to go to jail. So what did Walter do? He worked it out in a way. Remember, he was also dying of cancer, so there was death in the air. We thought maybe that's what he's getting dressed up about, that he's going to die soon. Well, he would. He rigged it in a way that the gang wound up shooting him and killing him. He laid down his life for not just that woman that was beat up, but for these people he thought he didn't care for. It is amazing the conversion that can take place in our lives. This season of Advent is an interesting time because we only seem to celebrate it in church. Because outside, if you haven't noticed, it's Christmas, okay? Thanksgiving, Christmas. It's okay. I don't put up a battle about that. But what are we doing inside here? This Advent, like all Advents, is like the beginning and end of a circle we call our liturgical year. And although we call this the first Sunday of Advent, it's taking us back to the time when, or to the time forward. It takes us forward to the time when Jesus will come again. Because we've gone through this cycle already and we've seen him raised up, and he promises he will return. And this first Advent is where this picks up, talking about when he will come again. So what do we do with this Advent? The information from the readings this morning tell us, especially Paul's words, we are to be loving one another. You say, well, we hear that all the time, love one another. It's the catchphrase for churches, love one another. But there's a lot of hate in the world, if you haven't noticed. There's a lot of hate among all kinds of people. So really, truly letting our heart love one another to the point of laying down our life for others in some way, and all of you find those ways to do that. You probably don't know that you're doing it because you're loving. In that one reading, we heard of a prophecy that God was going to raise up a new reed, a new piece of growth. And this would be the coming of the Messiah. This would be coming, this Jesus. Even though they didn't give a name to it, but they were anxious to see that grow up. And remember those things that Jesus said to us. Beware that your hearts do not become drowsy from drunkenness and the anxieties of daily life, that the day that will come will catch you by surprise like a trap. So how can we always be ready? How do we do that? I think that first catch is to remember to love one another, to forgive one another. But more importantly, to make the job a little more almost flowing from us, is to stop and think what we do at this church every day and certainly on weekends. What do we do? We celebrate Eucharist. If I were to address any one of you as a holy person, how would you react? If I said, Did anybody ever tell you you were holy? How would you react? A little scared? Okay. Let's look at what happens at Mass. You entered this building, and you're all sitting here. And the church teaches that because you're sitting here, Jesus is present. Really present. Really present. Where? In the body of Christ. So the first thing we have to get in touch with is what we hold in common. And what we hold in common is every time we get together, the body of Christ is really present because this is who we are. We read something from this book, and the church teaches, and Jesus is really present in the Word, really present. I'm here as a minister of the liturgy, and it says the priest, I hate to say this, is also holding the presence of Christ. And ultimately it reaches that climax when it all comes together and we're fed with that bread and that cup. So what happens at that moment? Think about it. You receive something that we call the presence of Christ, and it's going into you and into me. Now, I have this little bug in my life that I can't get out of my head because being a liturgist, you do know how to tell liturgists and terrorists apart, don't you? You can probably get some sense out of the terrorist. But every time I watch somebody put all those communion hosts that are left over in there, and then everybody watches as we put it away, the priest watch, everybody watches it, we genuflect and everything, which is give it the proper honor to the Blessed Sacrament. But I could have much as turned and genuflected to you. Why? You're the living tabernacle. I'm the living tabernacle of the Christ present in that communion. Where did it go? It went within us to remind us that it's been there all along. So wouldn't that call us to walk the ways of Advent, to be about love and not hatred? It is amazing to imagine, and we don't have to imagine it, it's present, that we are the tabernacle of Christ. Imagine if this whole building were called the tabernacle, which it is called in some religions. We don't have to wait necessarily till that door shuts to genuflect. In our minds, we could be witnessing that to each other. The Eastern people do it, as I've reminded you, with just a bow. May the God in me meet the God in you. They figured out that real presence. So how do we prepare and live out this Advent? To reflect on what we become, what we are, with that Christ within us. Walter never knew that Christ within him, at least not in his later days. He had arguments with the priest, but he laid down his life for another without knowing this Christ, at least in his teaching. But Walter became somebody who laid down his life for another, and it cost him his life. May that life be within us. May it allow us to make sure that our hearts don't grow drowsy.